Hanyuu Furude is such a fascinating addition to the diverse cast of Higurashi. Her role for the vast majority of the narrative is that of Oyashirosama, the foreboding guardian deity of the village of Hinamizawa, purveyor of a curse that pins her as the avatar of strife and turmoil for its inhabitants. As said curse is always there to shoulder the blame, to absolve their consciences of sin, be it sin born of pious superstition, antiquated traditionalist virtues, deep-seated trauma, or straight-up unadulterated malice. However, when the 11th hour rolls around with the penultimate chapter, Minagoroshi, Hanyuu finally enters the picture as a supernatural entity who shepherds Rika Furude through the Sea of Fragments with her mysterious powers. Once the fragment ends once again in disaster, Rika and her friends convince Hanyuu to join the battle alongside them, and their combined strength allows for Rika to finally escape the prison of 1983. However, even taking into account the most recent Higurashi animated adaptation, 2020's Higurashi Go and Sotsu, any information on who Hanyuu really is, or how she came to be, is staggeringly difficult to come by. All we get in Sotsu, for example, is a terse, borderline throwaway line from Eiwa, an entity whom we similarly know close to nothing about, remarking how Hanyuu is a failed specimen, a part of her that she rejects with utmost contempt. And so this video is an attempt at shedding some light on Rika's enigmatic guardian angel. Befitting of an ethereal, mystical demigod, much of Hanyuu's origin is shrouded in mystery, both in-universe and out. In-universe, the legend concerning Oyashirosama is said to be recorded in various sacred scriptures under the watchful stewardship of the Furude house, making the tale inherently malleable as it was handed down over numerous generations. Out of universe, if you were to consider the works that are the quote-unquote most canon as the ones most closely aligned with Higurashi's main storyline, the final chapter, Matsuribayashi Hen, and the epilogue arc, Saikoroshi Hen, offer passing glimpses into her backstory, painting a picture very similar to the folklore recounted in the present day. Hanyuu was from a clan of wanderers of unknown origin, implied by Rika to be either paranormal or extraterrestrial. These wanderers had been forced out of their motherland, left to roam in search of a refuge, when they happened upon the village of Hinamizawa, known in ancient times as Onigafuchi Village. It's revealed that the hostility and bloodshed that led to the village's corruption began due to this clan's arrival, with the natives branding Hanyuu and her people as suspicious, untrustworthy, and potentially dangerous demons, due in part to their quote-unquote monstrous appendages, the horns they so prominently displayed. After years of attempted harmonious coexistence, the fearful discrimination and scorn against her people had yet to calm, and in fact grew fiercer and more violent with every passing day. Thus, Hanyuu made her final decision to offer herself as a sacrifice, shouldering the burden of all the unnecessary suffering that her clan's arrival had brought upon the village, and thus purifying the souls of man, thoroughly embracing the image of the demon that the natives claimed her to be, a walking symbol of their own sin and bedevilment. And thus the duty fell upon her daughter, Oka Furude, Rika's direct ancestor, as a child born of both demon and man, to carry out the sacrificial ritual, a ceremony which would become known as Watanagashi, which Hinamizawa's eponymous celebratory festival was created in honor of. In 2014, Higurashi Ho, 7th expansion's updated Higurashi re-release, featured, as part of its bonus content, an alternative universe storyline consisting of 2 acts, Higurashi Outbreak and Kamikashimashi Hen. The latter act introduces 2 characters, Princess Tamura of Life and Une, both of whom claim to be entities from the same world as Hanyuu, and revolves around a territorial dispute between Hanyuu, Une, and Tamura, as they hash out who should lay claim to this humble little planet called Earth. Regarding Hanyuu's origin story, the chapter suggests that Hanyuu's race are much closer to extraterrestrial beings, some of whom had been embedded symbiotically within the fabric of humanity, existing alongside them for generations without their awareness. However, this integration was far from perfect and, over time, slowly began to unravel, manifesting in the form of random outbursts of paranoia and violence, leading to them being labeled as demons, and providing an explanation for the origin of Hinamizawa syndrome. While there are minor discrepancies and inconsistencies, it seems as though the pieces of Hanyuu's past that are touched upon in this chapter were deliberately crafted to come, more or less, into alignment with a story introduced 4 years earlier, Kotohogushi Hen, a full-length, standalone arc that is focused exclusively on covering Hanyuu's tragic past in exhaustive and comprehensive detail, finally revealing the picture in full. Kotohogushi Hen translates to Congratulating Chapter, and was included as a bonus chapter in the Nintendo DS port of Higurashi, titled Higurashi Kizuna, released in 2010 and written by Kano Kichi, the scenario writer for most of Higurashi's bonus scenarios, all of which were given a stamp of approval by Ryakishi 7. Long ago, a race of technologically advanced, interdimensional beings called the Ryun were forced to abandon their homeworld and wander the cosmos. This eventually brought them to planet Earth, where several of the Ryun assimilated with its native inhabitants, the human race, imparting them with advanced technical knowledge that allowed their civilizations to flourish through the ages. The remaining Ryun, who did not undergo assimilation, became known as purebloods. Generations of peaceful coexistence passed before something began to go awry. The assimilation process began to destabilize, causing a small percentage of human Ryun hybrids to fly into a bloodthirsty rage without warning, slaughtering anyone within reach. The pureblood Ryun took it upon themselves, as penance for the now widespread havoc and destruction, to dispatch these berserk hybrids, who, in their frenzied, rabid state, could only be described as demons. The warriors tasked with slaying these abominations were dubbed the Jedha, meaning observer. One of the most formidable and ruthlessly effective of these observers was a pureblood Ryun raised in the company of humans, a lone, skilled swordswoman named Hanyuu Furude Jedha. While on the outskirts of the sleepy village of Hinamizawa, Hanyuu has a chance encounter with the quirky priest Riku, heir to the Furude house. Hanyuu is injured, and Riku takes her back to the village for recuperation, giving her the name Hanyuu, as he finds her real name basically unpronounceable in human tongue. The two grow closer, and Hanyuu chooses to settle down in the village alongside Riku, with Hanyuu eventually giving birth to a girl, Oka Furude. Many years down the line, after Oka herself gives birth to a daughter named Fuka, an outbreak of a mysterious sickness ravages the land, and as the disease descends upon Hinamizawa, Fuka falls deathly ill. Oka begs Hanyuu for a means to eradicate the disease, and while initially reluctant, Hanyuu uses her Ryun technology to develop a specialized cure for Fuka and the rest of the villagers. However, word of this miracle drug quickly reaches neighboring towns, leading to a political standoff as the three great families work to reach an equitable treaty. As tensions mount, so do the victims of the disease, and thus radical extremists take it upon themselves to break the deadlock, seizing a supply of the medicine by force and leaving Oka gravely injured in the crossfire. Witnessing the aftermath firsthand, Hanyuu proceeds to slay the villagers who left her daughter for dead in a fit of rage, and turns her sights on razing the entire village to the ground, only for Oka to turn her sword on her own mother. Oka accepts that her recklessness in asking for the forbidden fruit in the first place is what created the calamity around them, and seeks to perish in battle, atoning for her sin of being every bit as foolish, flawed, and naive, every bit as human as the pitiful creatures that Hanyuu now holds such murderous contempt towards. Coming to her senses, Hanyuu realizes that she too must atone for her complicity in this disaster, and she implores her daughter to be the one to deliver her comeuppance. Thus, Hanyuu's long and tragic journey comes to an end, carrying both Oka's sins and the sins of the village to the depths of the underworld along with her, leaving Oka to be revered as the one who saved Hinamizawa from the rampage of the great demon, giving birth to the legend of Oyashirosama. The theme of never quite fitting in and eternally yearning for a sense of belonging and acceptance is something that permeates across Higurashi's colorful ensemble. It's a point I brought up in the past. Keiichi, having recently relocated from the big city for a fresh start in a quiet village nestled far away from civilization. Shion, a pariah essentially disowned and exiled to St. Lucia to live out her adolescence in isolation from the Sonozaki household. Satoko, the daughter of the Hojo family, made out as scapegoats for the Hinamizawa Dam incident and blamed for all subsequent disasters. Rena, seeking a source of stability and tranquility in her childhood hometown, away from the family-rending mayhem of Ibaraki. However, no one embodies this motif quite like Hanyuu. This is someone who had only known the life of a solitary vagabond, her people never having had a place to plant their feet firmly since the day they were expelled from their homeworld. This feeling is only exacerbated as her very existence itself becomes one of glaring contradiction, a Ryun of pure blood, tasked with slaying countless of her own kind across the globe, an invisible, valiant defender of humans, aka the very creatures whom she was raised in the caring company of, but who would, unbeknownst to her, in time, come to bring about her demise. This causes a rift in where her heart lies, with the humans she spent so much of her life among and watching over, or with her own people, the Ryun. When she realizes that fate may have forever relegated her to a middle ground between the two, she finds herself adrift, a nomadic outcast who relies on each swing of her blade to stave off the loneliness in her soul. Her quasi-retirement from her role as a Jetta with Riku only causes this dissonance to grow more pronounced. Despite having finally found a place among human civilization, she finds herself trapped in a web of fear day after day, masking her horns to avoid being outed and ostracized as subhuman, as a demon. It's a fate she worries will extend to her children, the physical manifestation of her poisoned Ryun blood hanging over them like a curse for generations to come. Something that drives her so far into desperation that she reconsiders bringing her daughter into this world at all. Paradoxically, forging a life among humans has only caused the gulf between herself, the Ryun, and the humans to widen, has only caused her to sink even deeper into the pit of isolation. And while her life in the village does bless her with uplifting moments of joy and levity, so too does it challenge her with heart-rending tragedy, slowly leading her to a moralistic crossroads. How far does her duty of care extend? Where does her responsibility as caretaker end, and mankind's own responsibility begin? This gives way to her sin of ambivalence, meting out just enough of the forbidden elixir to unwittingly drive the townspeople mad by temptation, granting Rika the ability to loop, but then staying at arm's length and letting the dice fall where they may, superficially washing away the sins of the humans and the Ryun with her death, instead of tackling the root cause of the darkness. All of these demonstrate a reluctance to move the needle too much in one direction or the other, a reluctance to disturb the status quo, which itself is growing ever more untenable. In Saikoroshi, Rika chastises Hanyuu, declaring how she regards these attempts at benevolent intervention as little more than cowardice, specifically arguing how Hanyuu's seemingly noble and merciful sacrifice was really nothing more than just her running away, leaving her daughter and her descendants to bear the cross of the aftermath, something that Hanyuu openly acknowledges, asking Rika to be stronger than her, to make the difficult decision to fight, where Hanyuu instead chose to flee. This is why, in retrospect, Matsuribayashi marks a pivotal turning point for Hanyuu, because it's where she finally abandons her post of passively observing from the sidelines, entering the fray alongside Rika in her battle versus Takano. The catalyst for this decision being her newfound trust in Rika and the rest of the club members, believing that the group's boundless compassion and solidarity signals a watershed moment for humanity, one that she had spent an eternity waiting in limbo to see firsthand. Hanyuu's character arc culminates with the final confrontation between herself and Takano. At the outset of the standoff, she still believes her role to be that of the sacrificial scapegoat, to purge the villainous Takano's sins at the cost of her own life. However, Rika's intervention proves her wrong, finally rescuing her from the pit of disillusionment, restoring her belief that even the most vile of perpetrators, such as Takano, do indeed possess the capacity for redemption, the capacity to live on, to endure, to right their own wrongs without needing to project their sins onto anyone or anything else as a coping mechanism. She finally sees how, in its quest for salvation, mankind doesn't need the guardrails of omniscient observers, paternalistic mediators, or demonic avatars of hate and vengeance. All it needed was more people like Rika and her friends. If there's one thing to take away from these tales recounting Hanyuu's past, it's that, beneath her adorable mannerisms, innocent and childlike demeanor, and seemingly unwavering benevolence, lies a tormented soul just as complicated and conflicted as the rest of the cast, molded by a past fraught with more needless tragedy, bloodshed, and grief than anyone could imagine, all brought about by rampant xenophobia, the misguided fear of the unfamiliar. The lesson imparted by Higurashi here being one that implores us to recognize how fundamentally unfounded that fear is, to not allow oneself to fall victim to or become consumed by something so trivial and baseless. Because, in spite of her otherworldliness, her godlike transcendence, Hanyuu's existential struggle is, at its core, so very, very human. It's the story of all of us, the search for something we can all relate to, a place where we are accepted, where we are given a chance to err and answer for our sins, where, in doing so, we aren't met with judgment or castigation, but with pathos, empathy, and forgiveness. The metaphor of the Joker and Old Maid fits Hanyuu to a T. The blackened card, the outsider who inherently sows disorder and discontent by its very existence. It's why the analogy Rika draws to the club's variant of Old Maid resonates with her so profoundly, as it's what Hanyuu had been seeking over the course of countless years, generations, and lifetimes. A place that is longing for her presence instead of the other way around. A place radiating with a feeling of thoroughly humanizing comfort she's never known in any of her past lives. A place to call home.